I really believe in the power of doing research work and deep analytical work to drive business decisions. It was a really sobering moment for me, and I was prioritizing looking good as opposed to prioritizing and being willing to accept a little bit of risk on recruiting's performance. There are some times when perfect listening is still not enough to overcome the situation at hand. I've often said that dashboards are there to sort of scratch a curiosity itch, but not really to support decisions. We're not thinking enough about business process and sort of the architecture of work, much of which has been handed down to us since Roman times.
Hi, Alexis. My name is Jithesh Anand. I will be your host for today's conversation on ValueMatrixTV. Viewers, there are probably a handful of people globally who have run people analytics at both a high technology hardware manufacturer and a pure digital platform. Our guest today has done both. At Intel, workforce decisions are tied to supply chains and capital timelines measured in years. At Meta, everything is shifted in a quarter. She ran the function at both as the executive who set the strategy, managed the team, and sat in the room with the C suite. Her PhD is in industrial organizational psychology, trained in research design and organizational behavior before she ever built a dashboard. For 19 years, she also held a concurrent research appointment at USC Marshall's Center for Effective Organizations, running that alongside every executive role she's held. She thinks about the question before the data and is quite direct that almost all AI tools currently in HR cannot do that. Past president of SIOP, the world's leading IO psychology society, and SIOP fellow, chairs the People Analytics board at I4CP, published author twice over. She now runs Propeller Insight and her own data-driven HR academy. Alexis Fink, welcome to our conversation today.
Thank you so much for that delightful and generous introduction. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Here's the first one, Alexis. So, Alexis, you described yourself as someone who is flunking retirement. That's a very interesting statement. But to understand what you're failing to retire from, I want to start somewhere that almost never comes up in normal conversations. Your PhD dissertation modeled team situation awareness for fighter pilots and astronaut crews for the US Navy and NASA. You were building cognitive frameworks for humans operating under conditions where a wrong decision can end lives. What did that world teach you about people that a business school never could have?
You do your homework. I'm so impressed that you went through and dug out a little bit of my dissertation. And it's interesting because that dissertation was explicitly on the team components and the mental model components that really led to effective decision making under conditions of high variability, right? There was very fast change and high information complexity and high risk, which sounds an awful lot like the universe in which we're operating today, right? There's a lot of information complexity, it's moving very fast, and for some businesses, it's quite existential. And although a lot of us sit with our own computer, we're really not doing it alone. And so our ability to have a shared mental model, a shared understanding of the situation, the dynamics, the forces that are acting on a situation really either supports or detracts from our ability to make good decisions quickly and efficiently. And so the thing that I don't think they teach a lot of in business school is that sort of team shared mental model and how incredibly important it is for being able to act quickly and for being able to really develop a team that will be effective together.
That's really a rich answer, and I just want to carry that momentum into our next question. Um, you co-host Integrate or Die.
Yes.
You have been on both sides of the mic. Directionally correct, edge of work, digital HR leaders, side tech at work, and the list goes on and on. So I'd like to ask a question every host wants to be asked. What's the one thing most interviewers do when they sit down with a senior people analytics leader that you wish they would stop?
Boy, and actually, I used to host Intel's Intel on AI podcast back in 2018 before
Oh,
everybody else had one.
wonderful.
The thing that I wish that interviewers would stop doing is showing up unprepared. It's surprising to me how many of them have kind of one idea and are not doing what you've already shown in the first sort of 5 minutes of our conversation, where you not only sort of understand the guest that's coming in, but the context of why that's interesting, and a little bit more about kind of the opus that they have, the work and the different things that are interesting to them. So many of them are just sort of a one track, and it, I think, makes a less gratifying experience for the guest, but a much less interesting experience for the audience. It sort of feels like, gosh, this interview could have been an email. And I think that the ability to add richness and complexity is why it's worth having a conversation.
I'm going to add a follow up question to that. And what's the question you've never been asked that you wish someone would have asked?
Oh, gosh. I spend a lot of time talking to people who are very anxious about their careers, and what they see when they look at someone successful is kind of an imagined linear path that got them there. And the reality is that's almost never true. And so I wish more people would ask about the sort of unexpected side quest that somebody went on that proved very valuable. So, what were the sort of unexpected experiences that made you a more interesting thinker, or that changed the way you engage, or gave you some differentiation that make you stand out in your current role, or give you new superpowers in the work that you're pursuing now?
Go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Alexis, you went from building talent intelligence at Intel to leading people analytics at Meta.
Yes.
Intel makes chips, Meta makes connections,
Yes.
but both are among some of the most data obsessed companies the world has known. So, my question to you is, what was the single biggest difference in how workforce data actually worked in these two companies?
Oh, wow. I think the biggest difference was, you mentioned earlier, the time horizons for Meta are different than the time horizons for Intel, right?
Yes.
Because of the nature of manufacturing and just how hard it is to stand up a semiconductor plant. Uh, so the longer time horizon was more acceptable. The longer time horizon around real strategic workforce planning was more interesting and more. I got more sort of airplay on that in the Intel job than in the Meta job. A lot of the forward-looking workforce planning was at a much shorter horizon for Meta, which makes sense given the dynamism of their business. As a person who's really interested in strategic workforce planning, it was very gratifying to me to be able to look on a longer horizon and to be able to think about using different types of talent in kind of a different way that longer horizon allowed. So to me, the time horizon, really driven by the nature of the business, was probably the biggest differentiator in that way.
And did that mean that strategy played out in quarterly cycles at Meta?
Strategy certainly shifts more frequently, right? We have, you'll see this in their product strategy. They'll ramp something up. You probably can't see it behind me, but I still have a portal that I dearly love. It's hanging on by its last legs. That was a big strategy, and then we really needed that engineering capacity to point at different products, so we closed that one down. And I definitely shed tears at the closure of the portal business. They certainly do move on shorter horizons and move to where they think the market is going, as opposed to Intel, which in some ways kind of gets to make the market, at least in the businesses where they do business. And so there's a little bit more. There's just sort of different market dynamics between them.
So I'm going to ask something that's linked to your people analytics work.
Yeah.
So in these companies, where did people analytics really change decisions? Whereas compared to it being just a beautiful dashboard.
You know, I push back sometimes on the term people analytics because I think it's a little narrow. And you mentioned that my team, the one time I actually got to name a team, my team at Intel, I called workforce science and talent intelligence because I really believe in the power of doing research work and deep analytical work to drive business decisions. And there were hundreds of medium-sized decisions and a number of very large decisions where we were actually able to run real research projects, real modeling projects at both. My favorite example that I use all the time coming from the Intel example was, this is going back almost a decade now, so it was much harder to do. So it took us a lot longer, but we built a passive skill extraction system that looked at the team you were on, the people who get hired into that team, the skills that they have. We really could digest for every person in the company a likely profile that was up to the minute. And we could score the number of pieces of evidence we had that you would have that skill or capability. And at the time, I was also responsible for our redeployment process. So when we closed down a project, when it met its natural end or we made a strategic shift, people got a few weeks, about 8 usually, to find another job internally. But only about 30% of them did. And I did a bunch of research and found out that of those who left, a very large proportion came back in just a couple of years. They had to wait till after 12 months so they didn't have to pay back their severance. But, in that sort of 2 to 3 years after they left, many of them came back, which tells me we did still need their skills. We just weren't finding that quickly enough. And since I had this skill extraction and we owned the business process, we could look ahead and say, I can see and we also did all the exit forecasting. I can see where I expect new openings that use these skills to emerge. I can see all of the requisitions that are currently in the pipeline that are going to consume these skills. I can put a hold on all of those and prevent them from being filled so that when these people are available, the jobs that they would be really compelling candidates for are available for them to meet. And then we changed a bunch of the hiring business processes. So you didn't have to interview 4 people. You didn't have to go through full interview loops. If you as a hiring manager had a conversation with someone who was in redeployment and that person met your needs, you could go ahead and accept them into that role as an internal transfer, because we wanted to reduce the number of people we were exiting from the company, not only as an expense, but because we know internal transfers outperform external hires most of the time. We knew that many of them were going to come back anyway, so we're going to pay them to leave and pay them to come back. And there is an awful lot of usually uncalculated trauma to the team that gets left behind, to all of their friends that get left behind, that slows down productivity, it reduces trust, all kinds of bad things happen. Through making those technological investments and those business process changes, we were able to get the land rate up over 80%. So we went from about less than a third of people finding them to really the vast majority, around 30% to a little above 80%, being able to find a new role. And some of those projects, we even landed upwards of 90% of people into new roles in their job search time. And that is an exciting place where real decisions are being made that impact real people based on data.
I could follow that thread for an hour, but let's just keep moving. So interesting to hear 90%. My, that also brings me to the one point that I did some research on, is that you've talked about a transformation you led that saved a factory and a town. You cut the cycle time at an Alabama paint plant from 27 days to just over 1 day. So we want to hear the opposite of that story. Has there ever been a project that looked right on paper and fell apart when it hit real people? What did it cost in terms of credibility, time, or business impact? Anything that it taught you that a win couldn't?
So I'll tell you 2 stories. One is explicitly political, and that's not unexpected, where something that is absolutely the right thing to do from a data perspective runs up against a strong leader who will lose political power because of it, right? I want to do this. We know the data are there. We've got stakeholders aligned saying this is correct, this is fair, this is efficient. And then someone else says, nope, but this is against sort of my interests in the company. And I have basically the political power to put a stop to it. And I see that kind of thing happen all the time. I've run into it too. I've burned a lot of political capital on it because I so believe in the thing that's right, and sometimes gotten mired. Gosh, in one instance, got mired for like 2 years in trying to do that. Another time, I spent fully 6 years trying to get performance management changed. 6 years. Every 2 years, we came forward. It's like, this is the right answer for this particular. It's the right answer. Oh, somebody politically didn't want to do it. And then finally, after 6 years, we got approval, and it's worked very well. And that particular system has now been in place for about 8 years. So there are definitely, sometimes you stick with it and it comes through. The other one's a little more unexpected, though. And this was early in my tenure at Meta. And one of the first things I was asked to do was really work on our attrition forecasting. That's pretty common, right? It's one of the first things people ask for. A lot of times they're asking for individual names, which I won't do for a variety of reasons. But at scale, it tells you how many recruiters you need in order to fill the pipelines, to make sure that you are staffed at a high level all the time, right? So we were working on that. And you're always going to have a range for attrition. And I came in, and the demands, as I understood it, meant that overestimating on the high end of attrition would make sure that recruiting could hit its goals. Estimating on the high end of attrition would make sure that HR didn't look like they were failing. Estimating on the high end of attrition was the safest bet I could make. And so we did our official estimates on the high end of attrition. And at the end of the year, we were very, very close. We didn't have a lot of carried over unfilled heads. Recruiting was staffed perfectly. We filled the heads. We came in under the forecasted number just a bit, not a lot, but a bit. And I felt really good about this. And a little while later, the head of engineering called me, not just email, and really gave me a dressing down and said, I want you to understand, here are the projects we did not start because we didn't think we'd have the staff for them. You thought this is the max we'd be able to hire, and here are the attrition we would experience. So you overestimated that attrition, and you're right, we were able to fully staff all of the projects. And here's all the projects we didn't staff. Here's all the revenue we didn't make on the projects we didn't launch. Here is what your conservative decision making cost the company. And it was a really sobering moment for me about what was I prioritizing. And in that case, I was prioritizing being safe, and I was prioritizing looking good, as opposed to prioritizing and being willing to accept a little bit of risk on recruiting's performance, on HR's performance, in order to support the best possible scenario of business performance. And that's a lesson that I really try to hang on to today.
Alexis, you coined a phrase that stuck with me, and I just want to talk about that. Survey fatigue isn't real. Inaction fatigue is.
Yeah.
Can you give a situation where you surveyed, listened, acted, the loop was closed, and the trust still eroded, the action happened, it still didn't work? What did you miss?
There are some times when perfect listening is still not enough to overcome the situation at hand. I've unfortunately been through several seasons of pretty dramatic strategy shifts and several seasons of pretty severe layoff experiences. And in those cases, really excellent listening can help soften a blow, but it can't make up for the fact that genuinely distressing things are happening. And you kind of asked a question about trust. The thing that there's a really, really, really great meta-analysis about trust from 2007. It's like 20 years old now, but it's so good. And essentially, it's Journal of Applied Psychology. Lapine is one of the authors. If you just search for Journal of Applied Psychology 2007 trust meta-analysis, you can find it. And they essentially showed across, many, 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 many studies that trust is basically made up of three things. It's made up of whether or not people have competence. Can you actually do the thing, right? That makes sense. It's made up of integrity. Will your deeds and your act and your words align, right? But the third one, which is actually stronger than the integrity one statistically, is benevolence. Do I think you have my best interests in mind? And even with really perfect, empathetic, qualitative, rich, vulnerable, like all the good things, even with that listening, if I don't think you have my best interests in mind, it doesn't, like I'm not going to be willing to engage in that conversation with high trust. And the organization, it will have lost some of my willingness to give to it freely, because they will have lost some of my trust. And there are certainly things we can do to then take that listening and make the organization better. But there are some situations, like an acquisition is another one, where it can feel like a pretty significant betrayal. You might be competent, you might have words and deeds that line up, but I don't feel like the work I was doing before mattered, right? Because that's now been sold off or whatever else.
I'm just moving on to the next one, Alexis. You co-authored How's AI Exposing the BS Economy,
Oh yes.
And called out the tyranny of dashboards, analytics teams endlessly building visualizations while the
Yep.
business waits for answers. So my question is, what's the most overrated, most overfunded practice in talent intelligence, as you would like to call it, or people analytics, as we've sort of referred to it right now?
uh, it's interesting because it's in a moment of transition, but every people analytics job I've had, there's been a really big demand for a dashboard. And I like to collect the back end metrics. The vast majority of them only ever get looked at a handful of times. So it's what people think they want. And then it gets built, and then it often never gets looked at again after just a couple of weeks. So it ends up being a lot of effort for very, very, very little return, and probably no decisions that were made on it. So I think that is probably the most wasteful thing that we do. And we're increasingly seeing those kinds of dashboard kinds of queries being handled directly with technology, so that the people analytics team can then spend more time on decisions. I've often said that dashboards are there to sort of scratch a curiosity itch, but not really to support decisions. And I used to say that every day I wore an invisible t shirt to work that said, I'm not in the curiosity business, I'm in the decision business. And so if there's something you're just curious about, I'm a very curious person, but if you're just curious about it, I probably don't have time and capacity on the team to answer that. If you're trying to make a decision, I am here for you.
A small follow-up question on that. What are people walking past that they should be paying attention to?
Oh, especially in this moment when AI is really changing how work happens, we are thinking too small. We are changing how work happens in an individual job in many cases, as opposed to thinking how work happens across jobs. And in fact, how work can now happen that couldn't previously, and what the consequences for that are. What are the new roles that we require? How do old roles adjust? What does that mean for management structures? What does that mean for compensation? We're not thinking enough about business process and sort of the architecture of work, much of which has been handed down to us since Roman times, right? Like the org hierarchy is ancient. And we really have an opportunity to rethink how we attach people to work in a way that gets work done efficiently, effectively, and in a way that takes advantage of what machines can offer as well as what humans still can do best.
Next one to you. You have watched this last year, an MIT report found that 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. You cited that stat yourself. When organizations come to you now, what are you seeing over and over? What's the pattern in how AI is going wrong, especially in HR?
Well, there's a set of patterns around where it's going wrong and a set of patterns around where it's really going right. There was a really good study, that MIT study got a lot of press. It was not particularly methodologically rigorous, and it was more like, here's how people are experiencing it. There was a new study that came out of Stanford's Digital Economy Lab maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and they found a few things pretty consistently. One of which was that when you are just using these tools to sort of speed up individual work, uh, you are usually getting a fairly modest improvement in efficiency. Like they found on the order of about 30%. But when you're using it to sort of fundamentally rethink work, you were getting more than double the benefit out of the project. So the first really big learning is don't just speed up your current process, really rethink the process. The second thing that I'm seeing actually has been around for a little while. And when you see successful projects, and that same Stanford report said more than half of successful projects did not result in any headcount reductions. They really resulted in being able to use people more effectively. My favorite example of using people more effectively comes out of IKEA 2 or 3 years ago. And they implemented a bunch of digital tools, a lot of AI in their customer service. It was one of the first places people often implement this kind of thing. We've seen some disastrous cases where they're offering prices that they shouldn't and things. In this case, it worked really well, and they were able to deflect somewhere in the neighborhood of half of their customer service inquiries they could handle autonomously. We found something similar at Meta. We got up to 90% case deflection in our internal HR operations, right? So you can absolutely use technology to take care of a lot of requests that maybe they just can't find on a website, but you can do through a generative AI type of technology. Instead of laying off I think it was 5,800 or so, thousands of customer service agents who used to answer these calls, they said, what are the remaining half that we can't do with technology? Oh, they're coming in with more complicated questions. It's not, how do I, get an extra part for this, or, would this fit through this doorway? It's, how do I make my small apartment function better? It's, what are my options for a weirdly spaced bathroom? It's, it's a real consultative opportunity. And so they basically retrained these agents into being interior design specialists. And
Wow.
yes, and they would book like 30 or 60-minute video conferences, like, show me your space, let's measure some things, oh, here's what you could do. And that resulted in orders per customer that went way up. It resulted
So good.
in the first year of implementation, you'll have to look up the actual numbers, but their first full year of running under this model, they netted over $1 billion of additional sales generated out of this. So they were taking those fairly low value add tasks that they could automate, and they turned it into a really high value add opportunity that I also suspect was more engaging and more interesting for the employees handling it.
Wow, that's such a useful way to reframe this whole thing that's happening with AI. Yeah, it's such a wonderful, like, it gives me goosebumps as you narrating the what was happening in that space. And you have watched this field go from just gut instinct to basic HR metrics to predictive modeling and to generative AI. So, Alexis, give us a prediction. 2 years from today,
Mm-hmm.
what will we be saying about AI in HR that we were not saying right now? And what are we treating as settled today that we look back on and say that is obviously wrong?
Wow. I hope that we are saying that HR has really been a driving force in reforming the organization to take advantage of AI. You see a lot of projects where it's treated as a technology implementation and it fails. They're not changing skills, capabilities, leadership, culture around it, et cetera, right? So I hope that we, 2 years from now, are saying, wow, HR is the difference maker between a technology implementation for AI that really underdelivers versus a transformation effort that really changes the way we do business and drives success going forward. I think that part of what we're saying is settled today is the nature of things that we think humans can do. They're only
Yeah.
humans can do. The frontier models now are getting really, really good. And you're right that they are, or the people are right, that they are patterns. They don't think in the same way we do. And so we're making assumptions about what the consequences are of that, and that that's a limiting factor. And we're seeing evidence now that it is a limiting factor in some ways, but in other ways, that's a tremendous strength. We saw in the last week or so that AI solved a math problem that had been vexing for something like 80 years. And one of my mathematician friends was talking about the fact that it's because AI was able to approach the problem sort of in the opposite direction than mathematicians had, because it wasn't sort of constrained by the same ontology or the same set of beliefs about how math proofs work. And it combined things that would not normally have been combined, or certainly hadn't been combined in the last 80 years. So I think that what we're taking as settled today is that AI sort of can't do advanced problem solving and this sort of really thoughtful, integrative, complex insight because it doesn't think like people. And there will be forms that it's not going to do as well. But there are also already pieces of evidence of that it can do that kind of integrative thinking in a different way that's very complementary.
Let's say someone is watching this show and is leading a people analytics team and or wants to build one. They've heard your warnings about the tyranny of dashboards. They've read the BS economy piece. What's one specific action that you would want them to take this week to make sure their work creates business value?
Oh, that is such a great question. And I think the one specific action I would want them to take every week is to spend time getting smarter about their business from the inside. Like, what are the risks? What are the competitors that they're worried about? What's the innovation that can elevate them or that threatens their position? So many people doing people analytics are really just thinking about HR as the boundaries of their universe. And the reality is, the places I've been able to make the biggest difference were where I really understood what the business was facing down, where the opportunities were, where the sort of strategic edge was, and to be able to dive into that with solutions or research or modeling around the workforce, as well as the workers and the sort of work itself, the business process, the nature of work itself, and why that work really mattered. So developing business acumen that is specific to the context you're in is incredibly valuable to making your work higher value add to the organization.
That lands so nicely. And I'm going to shift gears from people analytics to something that I noticed in your SIOP bio.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask about that. It says that you're an avid gardener,
Mm-hmm.
an almost competitive water skier, and a
Yep.
very bad place to know. And I'm wanting to know how close almost competitive actually is.
So I absolutely could register for a competition and probably place in at least one of the events. I can get through a course. I'm not very fast, but I can do it. So I could do that. And like, I have a good competition ski, and I love it. I don't, I just don't like, I don't have that urge and I don't want to sit around all day and only get to ski for 5 minutes. I'd rather spend more of my time playing. So I keep telling myself maybe this is the year I'll go ahead and like register for a competition because I could do that. But yeah, that's what that means.
So you're deliberately doing something that you're not absolutely good at. So does that show up in some ways in how you lead? Is there a connection between that and running transformations well?
Oh, I love that question. I really think that there is. So much of what holds people back is a fear of looking foolish, a fear of not being competent. And there's an awful lot of, if you study leadership, there's an old theory, French and Raven's bases of power. And one of those bases of power is referent power. It's the power you hold to basically be an example, right? And
Yes.
so you can strategically use that referent power by showing people it's okay not to know everything. This is culturally different in cultures, in one culture from the next, right? How much leadership authority you sacrifice when you show that you're not perfect at everything. And so you might need to sort of microdose your way towards it, but a willingness to be wrong or imperfect is the only way to build a new skill or a new muscle. And it's the only way to really give people permission to try something they're not already doing. And transformation is, in its essence, about doing things you're not already doing. So by definition, you're going to fail or at least stumble. And to make failure or stumbling not be a career ending event becomes really important, not only in getting through the transformation, but in getting people to stick with you through the messy middle so that you can get there. It's really important for risk taking.
Wow, that's such a rich and valuable answer, Alexis. I'm going to carry this momentum into our next round. This is a rapid fire round. It's more direct questions.
Okay?
I'd request you to go with your gut, your first instinct. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. Best AI tool you've actually seen used well in an HR context, maybe in the last 6 months.
I love the Nadia HR coaching.
Name one organization that's doing people analytics well right now.
Interestingly, Walmart is doing great stuff. They've got such huge scale.
What are they doing that others aren't?
A lot of it is the scale that they have around the workforce pieces and how they can recruit and select effectively.
Most overrated metric in HR analytics.
Oh my gosh, attrition. Everybody looks at it first, and it's not the most powerful thing.
Imagine you're 24 today. You're entering HR. What will you specialize in?
Oh, I would absolutely specialize in IO psychology and in sort of the people analytics space. I believe that most HR leaders should have that kind of a background, and I believe that it really should be the driving force for the HR function in this AI era.
Last question, the rapid fire round. One thing you would get every CHRO to stop doing tomorrow if you could tell them that.
One thing I would get every CHRO to stop doing tomorrow, I would get them to stop reading the comments section of whatever their online platform, communications platform is. They get so distressed by one angry person.
Thank you for joining me. It's been such a sharp, honest conversation. I'm grateful you made the time. Alexis, I came into this with about 10, 12 questions, and I'm leaving with about 30 more, which is the mark of a good conversation. I'm going to save that for the next time. Thank you for being so generous with your thinking.
Thank
It's
you
been
so
a
much.
genuine pleasure. Have a great day and a fabulous week.
This was a genuine pleasure for me. Thank you so much. And I look forward to a next conversation.
Yes, same here. Thank you.